Good morning. This is Susan of the North with the weekly overview for March 10th through the 16th, and one thrown on for the 17th, just for St. Paddy's Day. Let's begin with Sunday the 10th. We have the rune Awaz reversed. Awaz reversed is never a bad rune. It is simply that instead of moving forward quickly at an even keel, things are slowing down a little bit, which may be okay because on Monday, the rune I drew, Berkano, this is the rune of the feminine and nurturing. And sometimes when this rune comes up in a reading and my client is female and she's very tired, then I can always say to her, you need to do some more self-nurturing. Does that happen for any of you watching this podcast? Aside from that, Berkano is also the rune of the birch tree, the liminal. She's a rune of initiation, birth, weddings, death, funerals, and other things that we consider rites of passage in our cultural life. The next rune that comes up for Tuesday, the 12th, is the rune Stan. It means stone, it means foundation, and also because you see it's sort of a contained symbol. I can also interpret a foundation to mean something that you might be building a container for. Okay, how do I mean that? I had a dream last night in which I was making containers, and then once out of some organic substance that was liquid and had to dry, and then I was filling them to hang them up where they would be food for other beings. But for some reason, I couldn't get the recipe for the stuff to be contained just right. And so it would rot. And then finally, my last batch was perfect and I could hang it up, and I hung it up outside and birds were coming to eat from it. And it was just, it was just one of those absurd dreams, but it had a lot of meaning to me because, you know, I'm finally in alignment in reading the runes with what I love to do in my life. So I am creating a container through this podcast and through a website and through writing books to do that which can perhaps nurture others on their own pathway. So this is what I mean by containment. So it could be a foundation for a house, it could be a foundation for a new lifestyle, it could be something new coming into your life that will be a foundation or a container for a lifestyle that will be your, in the words of Joseph Campbell, your bliss. So this is the foundation. This falls on the 12th. The next rune for the 13th is Manaz. Manaz is the rune of humanity. And collective humanity, I am becoming more and more aware of in my spiritual studies and conversation with other people who are as deeply into this thing as I am. The collective, the human collective is God. And it's what we decide collectively, the balance of how we live our lives and struggle through and what we want to see through our own personal manifesting and integrity. It comes down to that, as you'll see in a rune draw later this week. What we want to manifest, what we contribute to the world at large, to humanity at large. If you look at one half of this rune, you see it's how a mirror image of the other. And we human beings are social creatures. You know, people like myself like to get off alone for a while because it helps us to recharge our inner batteries, because a lot of people aren't as aware and they are draining. But we still love people, so here I am doing the podcast and I have a day job because I love people and I don't want to be just totally isolated. But this is the rune of what do we bring to each other? I feel that at our best, humanity brings reciprocity, cooperation, shared ideas for mutual well being. I'll leave that thought with you. And I go into the rune for Thursday, the 14th. This is the rune Othila. Othila has applications with family ties, ancestor ties, that which is inherited, real property. That interpretation goes back centuries to when the runes were first created, because peoples were still living not only in the nuclear family, but they were part of an extended clan called the tribe. And the lands that the tribes inhabited pretty much belonged to the same, family group. And so it has ties to the land. And one of the ideas that I'm so fond of, and I don't know if I'm just babbling inanely, but when I've read a couple of different books on Native American spirituality, and one was by Beautiful Painted Arrow, and he was talking about how the language of his people rose out of their connection to the land. And I read another book, author I can't think of right now, but it was by the Huichol Indians, who migrate annually to gather the sacred peyote for their ceremonies. And he mentioned that in that too, the same thing, that the language their people spoke, different tribe, grew out of their relationship with the land. And I'm of that same mindset with the runes, because the runes have a connotation with an alphabet, but they also have sounds that grew out and grew into the language of that time. So we have connection with the ancestors, we have connection with the DNA, we have connection with real estate, real property, and all of those associations. Sometimes this rune comes up when you might want to take up an ancestor practice and honor your ancestors in order that you might be able to heal through your own self-healing, emotional or otherwise, those things that haven't been unfinished by the ancestors. Now, the next rune that comes up represents a bit of a challenge to the end of the week. And let me explain myself through interpretation of the mythology too. This rune is Tyr, also called Tiwaz, and it has linguistic ties to the earliest of the gods. And the god Tyr is like the North Star. He's the leader. People follow him. He's one who provides direction. In the Icelandic mythology, the god Tyr is the only one who could get along with the wolf Fenris. Now, the story goes that the god Loki had procreated with a very evil witch. I mean, I don't know if she was evil or not. This is just the story as it comes down to us, and had 3 children by her. The first one was Hela, and she was a person who had power over death. She could transform her body into a decomposing corpse. I know it sounds gross, but because of her power, Odin put her in charge of the realm of the dead. And then there was another child, Jormungand, who was a serpent, and he was put into the waters surrounding Midgard. And then there was Fenris, which I have from Maria Gavilhau's book, Seeds of Yggdrasil, that it translates pretty well directly to the Wolf of Greed. So when we talk about Loki's 3 children, and there's an entire podcast that could be done on just this topic. Anyway, the 3 children were taken away from their parents and put in their respective places, but Fenris came back to live with the Aesir and the Norse gods. And so Tyr was the only one who could handle this wolf. They were friends, but because Tyr was also a war leader, leader of the war band, and the other gods were getting very frightened by how large this wolf was becoming and how big his appetite was. So they were trying to chain him. They were trying to bind him so he couldn't do any harm. Well, the third time they tried chaining him, by now the wolf Fenris is pretty fed up with their efforts, and he's not quite so trustworthy anymore of what these people are trying to do to him. So he says, well, if I will suffer being chained, if you will have some one of you put their arm in my mouth. Tyr was the only one who had the courage and whom really Fenris had the trust for to allow that. So they bound the wolf. He couldn't get loose, and he bit off Tyr's sword hand. So the god Tyr lost something very valuable to him because it was a sword hand. But also, I look at Tyr is in the role of someone who lives with absolute integrity. You know, you have to be a person of integrity, in my opinion, to lead. And he had to betray the wolf who trusted him in order to satisfy the group he was leading, whose fear was out of bounds in regard to this wolf. So he had, and this is my interpretation, you know, somebody else might interpret it differently, but he had to make a choice based upon his own integrity that may have gone against what was really, you know, ideal. But he had to do that. So perhaps for this day, Friday, you might find yourself caught between a rock and a hard place where you have to make a choice and make the choice according to the highest integrity that is in you, but it may not be the best choice you could make. And the rune that comes up on Saturday is a really hard rune. This is Quiorth. This is the funeral pyre. However, this hits you in your life, if you happen to be seeing this podcast. I often find Quiorth when it shows up and I'm doing a reading for a client. Sometimes someone in the family has died and they have to clean up all of the residue from that family's life. This could go back to the interpretation for Thursday also, if you're taking up ancestor work, cleaning up the shadow. But it can also apply to something, an energy that you have held on to for far too long. You know, it could be a resentment. It could be a way of life that you wanted something more from than you ever got. And you're holding on to ideas that no longer serve you and that you need to clear your soul and your spirit from in order to move forward. When I draw this rune in connection with myself, and I am also, because when I draw these runes, I follow them as to how they show up in my day, and they give me advice for how I want to meet the energies of the day. So when this one comes up for me, I know that I have some serious mental house cleaning, emotional house cleaning, and I like to get into the physical house cleaning because the energy I put out doing that work helps me to stay on the intelligent side of sometimes turbulent emotions. And in the process, I can get rid of stuff that pertains to the thing that I no longer want to give energy to. So, in this rune also, I will say this about it. You know, we drag our feet on the most difficult of things. We procrastinate, and that's human. I'm not finding fault with anybody for doing that. But what I have learned in my own experience is that the more I am able to be willing and accepting of whatever the situation is, the more quickly I can move through it. And you sort of see how Quiorth is structured. You know, it's moving, 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 moving. So I'm like, when this one comes up, I'm like, okay, I want to get through it. But because this rune ended the week, I did something that I very seldom do. I draw the runes for the week ahead and then, but I don't want to end this on a bad note because it's challenging. So the rune I drew for the week following on St. Patty's Day, this is a great rune to draw, I guess, coming out of that last one. But when you do the work of Quiorth, you empty yourself in order to get clarity. And this rune is the God rune. This is God's mouth. This is in our chakra system. You know, the throat is what gives creative voice to what we are doing. You know, so where you may have started with a difficulty on Thursday with the challenge of integrity that was posed by Tiwaz reversed, and then Quiorth, and having to deal with the fallout of whatever presented itself. This rune will bring you to clarity. It will bring you to creativity. It will bring you to a more internalized idea of what you want to give voice to. And I think what better rune to pull on St. Patty's Day? So may the luck of the Irish be with you today. This is Susan of the North with the Rune O's.